Hey everybody, welcome to the Song Revolution podcast, brought to you by Nashville Christian Songwriters. Nashville Christian Songwriters exists to empower Christian songwriters worldwide. I'm John Chisholm, and this podcast exists to bring you valuable songwriting insights, inspiration, interviews, and just all around good fun with some of the greatest songwriters, producers, arrangers, artists, and creatives, and beyond. You can find out a whole lot more about us at NashvilleChristiansongwriters.com.
Sometimes you gotta go dark. Sometimes you gotta be quiet. Sometimes you gotta get far from the voices that stir up violence. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. You gotta get down low. You gotta turn it down low. You gotta take it down low. You gotta get down low. Sometimes you gotta go first.
Hey everybody, John Chisholm back with you, and you've just been enjoying Christa Wells, a song called Down, Down Low, off of her brand new EP, Velveteen, and yes, it is about the little bunny that you may have had or read about when you were a kid. Christa is a mother of 5, so I'm sure that they've read that book a time or two. Christa and I sat down this week and just got to know each other, love her heart, love her music. She's an award-winning songwriter with a big song called Held by Natalie Grant, songs by Plumb, Ellie Holcomb, Selah, Point of Grace, and so many more. And we just talked about all kinds of things. Her recent divorce, the challenges of being a single mom and an independent artist, and the creative process, her songwriting process, and just some deep and awesome things that I think are going to encourage you throughout this show. So, hey, thanks for being here, and sit back with me and enjoy singer-songwriter and Velveteen rabbit lover Christa Wells. Oh, all right. Hi, Christa. Welcome to the show.
Hey, John. I'm so glad to be here.
It's fun.
It's fun. Very fun.
Now, we went straight from being new friends to just deciding we're going to be old friends.
Yes,
right?
just skip all the middle.
That was
kind of
fun.
It was very fun. I feel completely at ease now.
I'm so glad. You are an old soul. Not that you're an old person, but I'm an
Getting
old person. But there's a wisdom and an elegance about you that is immediately attractive. And I love that. And I feel like it's that kind of, kind of thing that can make it where two people can just, be instant friends. And Jenny Owens introduced us. Thank you, Jenny, if you're listening.
Yes, just yesterday.
I know, right?
It was very fast. We were on it.
I tell you what, well, Jenny is the best, and she's a great friend to NCS, and she's appeared at 3 of our NCS weekend intensives. And so any friend of Jenny's is a friend of ours.
She's a special one. We've gotten to write a few songs over the years, and several of them long distance. I think she's my only person that I've actually written with via Skype.
Really?
And it worked for us.
A Skype write.
Yes.
But anyway, well, that's cool. Jenny has now left Nashville and is in NYC, which is sad for us.
Yes, I'm trying to conjure up an excuse to get up there so I can hang with her and explore the city.
And Broadway. I mean, what other excuse do you need? Right?
I need money. If someone listening would like to sponsor my trip to visit Jenny in New York City.
A crowdfund.
That's right.
So let's just jump in, Christa. Okay. Tell us, how did all this get started for you? What's the genesis of your music and all that?
Well, when I was in the womb, a little bit after that, let's see. Let's fast
forward.
forward.
Of my conception.
Well, I always say when I was a kid, music was always the thing for me. It was the thing I was drawn to by myself when I was 5 or 6, 7 years old. In one way or another, I have distinct memories of taking nursery rhymes that had no music and pulling out the old-fashioned tape recorder and making up melodies for these nursery rhymes when I was 6 or 7 and wanting to record it and hear it played back and change it and write, things like that. I think that was the beginning or the foreshadowing of my songwriting career. But it's, in high school, I started actually writing out of my teenage angst and sadness, I started writing these songs at the piano and really wanted to be a performer. That's what I thought. I saw Amy Grant looming large in my teen years and wanted to do what she was doing. I didn't actually think about the songwriting part. I didn't, even though I would lay there on my stomach and read all her lyrics. And so I knew she wrote them, but I didn't think really about that being a career in and of itself. Then I got to college and found that I didn't actually love, well, at that time I didn't even enjoy it at all, singing in front of people. I wanted to enjoy it, but every time I had the opportunity, I just froze and my throat would constrict and I would break out in this awful red splotchy hives and my voice would shake. And so it was always rather disastrous. But the songwriting, once I started, I couldn't stop from my teen years on. So my opportunities to actually do it vocationally really began, my launching pad was when my friend Tiffany Lee and her husband Jeremy Lee. Tiffany is Plumb, the artist Plumb, and she and I were doing some writing together, and she was going to record a couple of those songs. And her husband was going to begin handling her publishing, and he said, "Hey, would you let me take some of your songs and see if I can find homes for them?" And he did. So the first thing he placed was a song called Day by Day. He placed with Point of Grace for their album 24, which was like 23 hit songs and one new one. And that was just crazy because it was the very first song I had cut and it was number one. CCM. So I just thought of myself as a songwriter for a few years and just, providentially had a few songs that did really well. Not a lot. I didn't have a ton of cuts. I just had a few precious ones that did really well. Mm-hmm. And then I began playing my own songs in 2009 for real. A little bit sooner than that, but not with any seriousness until really 2009. So I'm a late bloomer. And now I jokingly say, I spend 80% of my time towards 20% of my income. The independent artist side takes a lot of time and it's a lot of hard work, but I find so much joy in that space now. So that was a long answer.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. No, exactly what we need to hear, kind of the genesis of this for you. And to start off with, that kind of a cut, Point of Grace, just
it's very helpful.
Right out of the chute.
Yeah.
Boy, we would all have loved to have had that. That's awesome. And Plumb, you still co-write with Plumb?
Mm-hmm. Well, she's been busy touring her recent album, and I co-wrote 3 of those songs, I think, is what's on there. God Help Me is one of them. And we actually co-wrote that with our friend Luke Sheets. And several years ago, the 3 of us co-wrote Need You Now that Plumb did. So both of those songs did really well. And it was the 3 of us. So we always want to do more together.
Yeah.
Hopefully that'll come around again.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And everybody would love to have that kind of a connect, but it was just organic for you. She was already a friend. It wasn't something you just went out and fabricated a relationship with someone.
No, I was never very good at that networking thing, but I did. She and I had both at separate times been backup vocalists for Benji Gaither. Oh, yeah. And that's how we connected and knew each other. And then we both moved down here. And so, that was... Tiffany and Jeremy are both great at seeing a diamond in the rough and believing in people and helping to open doors for people, for newcomers.
Nice.
I've seen them do that for a number of people, and they certainly changed everything for me, in
That's
the early
amazing.
2000s. So super grateful.
Do you tend to write more lyric or more melody or a little of both, or...
I definitely write both. I feel stronger as a lyricist. So it depends on the dynamic of the co-write. But I write, most of the writing I do is solo writing. So obviously I'm doing both lyrics and melody there. But when I'm doing the whole thing, it has a more independent feel to it, more singer-songwriter. And it's funny, a couple years ago when Need You Now was playing a lot on the radio, my younger daughter heard it playing and she said, you know these songs that you write with other people that end up on the radio? She said, you should do more of that. And I'm like, well, I do love that, but I also love this other style.
Out of the mouths of babes, right? They just have
she likes
a way.
that big, she has an ear for the pop commercial production, and I love that too. So yeah, do a little of both. But I definitely consider myself more a words-driven person. The concept, the idea, and the poetry of it are the most inspiring to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. And it definitely shows up on your new project, Velveteen. What a wonderful, wonderful record. I've been reviewing it, for our interview today and love it. And it is singer-songwriter. Yes. And it is, but Ben Shive did a great job.
He did.
Great producer, but captured something sort of in between, maybe. Do you think?
Yeah, because I think he's done work in both of those arenas. And so he is great at wanting to know the artist he's working with and wanting to honor your heart and your influences. And so we spent, every time I've worked with him, we spend a good bit of time listening to music that inspires us and figuring out which direction to go. But he also wants the record to do well, and so he's able to go, hey, on this one, I think this is the one that has the potential to be, shared a lot and kind of be the most accessible for people most quickly. And so let's go this direction, and without feeling like anything gets compromised. There's no artistry that feels lost in his production. I love it.
Yeah, it seemed to straddle for me the big pop CCM sound with singer-songwriter in a very endearing, listenable way. You know? Yeah, like Down, Down Low is so awesome. Is that the current
quirky single? I don't really have any singles, but that was the first one that I did release 3 of them as singles before I dropped the full EP. So that was the first song.
Gotcha.
And I'm curious, I have a couple musicians working on remixes of a couple songs. We released a remix of Holy Ground, and this spring we're going to have a remix of Down, Down Low. That is the most up-tempo, dancey kind of track on the album. And I was so excited because I write on the piano. I don't tend to write dancey songs, but I actually love dance music. I love to dance. And so my kids, everybody was so happy that I finally had a song that people could dance to. So I frequently get videos of people's children, dancing to that, little toddlers dancing to that song. It's a fun one.
I don't know. I was especially drawn to Hold This House Up. I just love that one. I love all of them, but I don't know. My heart was kind of going out for
I've heard that about that song. I was pleased with the response to this album because it, on the whole, didn't have one track that I was hearing overwhelming. I mean, Velveteen, the title track, definitely, it was added to some playlists, so it got the most, exposure. But as far as hearing from people, it seems like I'm always hearing a different song, and I love that. But Hold This House Up was one of a couple songs on the album that is the most personal to the story that I was, the life story I was going through at that time. As I was in the process of losing my marriage and writing to process, writing as therapy and as prayer. And so Hold This House Up is pretty vulnerable. And in fact, it's hard for me to sing that song if I'm not because I get emotional, but it's hard for me to sing it and play it at the same time. I don't always perform that one unless I have my friend Andrew there to play it for me, because it just requires something of me that is hard for me to split my brain and perform it.
I wasn't awake to notice the rain. I wasn't awake until I saw you kneeling in the mud. I added the cost I gathered the rope, I sounded the bell, but oh, the damage had already been done. I know it's late, but I think it's not too late to get our hands dirty and act like it's worth being saved. So will you help me hold this house up? Will you help me hold this house up? Will you help me hold this house up and let the waters pass beneath? You wanna let go, let it go on. You haven't the heart for one more disappointing turn of events.
Do you tend to write more from the real things going on in your life, or just write out of just cool ideas?
No, I definitely write from real things most all the time, whether it's my real things or other people's real things going on. So Hold This House Up was directly me saying to my husband, I can't do this. One person can't keep this afloat, but this was pre-separation that I wrote it. And that song and another song, Come After Me, which I think are back to back on the album.
They
are both songs in that vein. And when I perform them, I like to, it always feels slightly awkward to me to perform those two because I feel they're both so obviously real life and real storytelling in a way and vulnerable that I feel comfortable with it. I mean, I've been singing them for a while now. I don't feel awkward, but I feel almost like the audience feels like, should we clap? Do we cry? Do we, we've been let in. What do we do with this that we've been entrusted with? I feel that a little bit from them. So I usually like to point out that it's a beautiful thing how you can write something to a person and it's simply a human to human song. I don't feel like every song needs to be a metaphor for our relationship to God. I feel he gave us these sacred relationships, and we can talk about all of that. When I first released these songs, a couple people here and there would respond and say, "Oh, it's so beautiful how it sounds like you're talking to a person, but then towards the end of the song, it's like it turns and you're talking to God." And I really was kind of repelled by that initially. I wanted to say, nope, I'm not talking to God. I'm talking to my husband and just leave it. Don't try to make it something. It's not, even though obviously once you put music out there, it's not just yours and it does become whatever it is to others. But as far as my own understanding of the song, it was very human, very horizontal at the time of writing. By the time of the release show, a few months later, it dawned on me that it had become a plea to a human that was answered by God. So both of those songs, Come After Me, wanting to be pursued, and also Help Me Keep This Thing Together, help me to take care of my family. Both of those pleas went out to a human and were responded to by a caring and loving God. And that has been a beautiful thing for me to witness firsthand in my own life. I've heard stories of, we all know stories of God showing up for other people, but this was maybe the first big thing definitely the biggest thing in my life, the biggest opportunity for me to reach a point where I cannot fix this myself. I'm at my end, and it really has to be a miraculous intervention.
Wow.
Not just to save my marriage, which didn't happen, but to save me, and to keep me. So, yeah, that's a little bit about those two songs.
One of the things I say a lot, Christa, is that, and this comes from psychologist Carl Rogers, is that which is most personal is most universal.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's like this true, and I try to encourage the songwriters I work with to dig deep, but to redeem the pain somehow. Don't just emote and gush out the pain, puke out the pain. That doesn't, I don't think that, I don't know that does anything much, right? But you took this prayer that really you were saying to your husband right?
Right.
But it's you weren't just puking out the pain, you were expressing pain,
Right.
but it became something bigger than your own story, is what you just said. I'm not trying to repeat you, but
Yeah, that's what happens, I think, if you follow the thought. I think sometimes we're not ready to follow the thought through, and so we write, songs that are just hurt, and sometimes that just stays on the piano. It doesn't. It's for the moment, like you needed to just sit there and pour it
Right.
all out, but it's not necessarily helpful to anyone else. And one of the things that's become important to me is, and Frederick Buechner has a popular quote, which I will not be able to recall right now, but it has to do with finding that intersection between your joy and the world's hunger. And so I want to create things that are not just one or the other. I think we can go out and try to anticipate what does everybody need from me and write songs that lack authenticity because it's not meeting you.
Yeah.
Or it's not coming from a real place. You're just simply trying to guess. And sometimes those songs are all joy and all clouds and all rainbows and overlooking the real human experience. And then on the other side, if it's just for me, it can become very self-indulgent. And that's, write it, but just maybe it doesn't need to be recorded and sent out to everyone. And it's not that we're going to get that right all the time, but to the best of our awareness at any moment in life, I think it's important personally to question everything that I'm about to put out, whether it's a post on Instagram or it's a song or it's a conversation, to kind of pause and say, is this good for me and for them?
For real.
Or just one or the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important, to be much more aware of, and again, I coach songwriters all the time, so I'm trying to help them be in touch with the real process, which is emotional. I'm being swallowed up by this chair. It's like, I feel like Edith Ann and the big rocking chair.
That.
Do you remember that?
Oh my goodness, it's one of my favorites.
I
from
feel like that in this chair. It's
I
like,
love it.
it's big. It's so much bigger than me. But trying to help songwriters be aware of that tension between just emoting cathartically and writing something that's valuable or could become valuable to other people. So thank you for doing that. And it's obvious. I mean, just even on a few listens through, Hold This House Up, I think it really is amazing. So do you want to talk about some of the other songs through the record a little bit?
Well, the title track is Velveteen, and that was the only song that I've co-written and recorded, really. And it was several months before our separation that I was struggling. Things were very difficult and painful, and I was sitting on the couch. I was reading Ann Voskamp's book, Broken Way, or the Broken Way, and somewhere in there she's recounting a conversation with her mom, and she refers to the Velveteen rabbit story, and I had not reread that book since I was a child, but it's often quoted or referred to. So I read this and instantly was just like caught, had this catch in my throat because it felt so resonant with my experience. And basically she was talking about how all these things that you feel like you've done wrong, your failures, the things that have been done to you that have just marred your beauty and made you something less than or taken away from your life and your joy, that these are the very things that give you beauty and give you depth and strength and character. And I sat with that for a little bit, and I had written from, Ann and I are friends, and we've collaborated before, and I've written another song called How Emptiness Sings based on her writing. So I had this moment where I just knew, as I knew with the other songs, I'm going to write this song. I'm going to write a song about this. This is going to, but I was so scared of writing it for a few months because I knew I could ruin it. It was such a great concept, and I thought I could ruin this so easily, make it very cheesy. And so I finally started it the next spring and wrote this chorus. If my beauty starts to fade, well, I've been held in 1,000 ways. If my heart looks broken in, well, I've been brave enough to live. If perfect turns to perfect mess, and all your love is all that's left, then I'm as real can be. Call me Velveteen. And that's it just came together because by that time, that is what my experience was, is that I felt devastated and more alive than ever at the same time. I felt like I was awakening to the real stuff of life, and I had no energy for any falseness, any inauthenticity. I felt real. I felt like I had come into something new and beautiful despite the mess around me. And one of my favorite parts of the story as I reread it is that the Velveteen rabbit is ultimately scooped up with all the other nursery toys, and he's going to be burned in the burn pile because scarlet fever has been in the house and they need to get rid of everything. And he's laying there and he says, of what use was it to be loved and have my fur worn off and all of that if it just ends like this? And I thought, who has not felt like that before? Who has not felt discarded? And then he sheds a real tear, and his tear falls to the ground, and from that sorrow comes a flower, and out of the flower comes this nursery fairy, and she says, I've come to make you real. And she makes him real in yet another way. He already thought he had accomplished that by being loved in the nursery. But at this point, she makes him into an actual living rabbit, and he hops off into the forest. And that just spoke to me of the truth that sometimes, unfortunately, in life, it's the things that you think will destroy you that if you handle it, if you allow God to work through it, these can be the things that make you come alive to Christ in a way you never have before, to experience Christ and the love of Christ in a way you've never even imagined. So I feel like I'm still definitely in process of all of that. But Velveteen came from that, and so it's very special.
Love spoke my name, and I felt life run through me. Reborn in the flames, nothing can undo me. Ooh, I believe that I'm becoming. So if my beauty starts to fade, well, I've been held in 1,000 ways. If my heart looks broken in, then I've been brave enough to live. If perfect turns to perfect mess, and all your love is all that's left, then I'm as real can be. Call me Velveteen. Shadow and light, I learned to let them find me. Coming alive feels a lot like dying. Ooh, I believe that I'm becoming. So if my beauty starts to fade, well, I've been held in 1,000 ways. If my heart looks broken,
good friends Nicole Witt and then later Ben Shive, even in the studio. The last minute I was still unsure about some parts of the song, and he helped me arrange. So, but I knew that song had to be written. And so it's found a home in people's hearts. And I think it's just something that, again, like you're saying, it's very specific in a way, very personal, but I think that's the way we got to go. To, the more you try to write universal, the more you just water stuff down and it gets diluted.
Right. Yeah, I had one client ask me, well, how do I write for the masses? In fact, I've had several people going to use that phrase, and it's like, well, you can't. I mean, what a useless concept to begin with, and how frustrating that would be. You have to write from what you know. You have to write from what you feel. Yeah. Not that there's not a craft that you can, come up with some things that could be hits. I mean, in pop music, we could argue about groove and just being, have a good beat and easy to dance to. But, when it comes to really communicating something of the soul, right? And that's what you're doing. I love that story. I'd forgotten the Velveteen Rabbit story, so I'm so glad he got to hop off into the forest. I would have been bummed out if he hadn't been able to do that. So it sounds like, though, that the process is about holding all things as sacred and holy, and your song Holy Ground kind of speaks to that. You want to talk a little bit about that one?
That's been a big soapbox for me for years, and I've been fortunate to be a part of several circles, groups, and one of them being this an arts camp for high schoolers that I am part of in the summers. It's called Masterpiece, and we've just spent 20 years discussing this idea of sacred versus secular, and what does that even mean? And so then, and I read Charlie Peacock's book called At the Crossroads, which also helped inform my thoughts on this whole thing. But John Foreman wrote a prologue to another Charlie Peacock book, and that was the impetus for me sitting down at the piano. I don't even remember exactly what he said, but it led me to this idea of what we are doing in the arts could be called a lot of things, escapism, and that we're, painting sometimes rosier picture than what is, or that we're just not being very pragmatic or practical. And he said something that led me to write Holy Ground, which is basically countering that, saying we're not what we're saying. We have been given eyes to see something. We don't see all the things. I certainly need my left brain people to help me with accounting and all kinds of other things. But we're seeing something, that a lot of things that can't be put under a microscope. But it's something so valuable, and maybe the most important thing that we're able to do is to stop dividing things out as secular and sacred, but to just hold all things as being holy and God-given and having something to offer and teach us. So it kind of, it's hard for me to sum up that song. It deals a little bit with trying to avoid the temptations of the world in a way, fame and fortune. In the second verse, I talk about that a little bit, that if, I can't remember even my own lyrics, but something about
if your compass is pointing to wealth and fame, it has been altered.
Yeah.
There's only one true north, one good road to follow. If you lift your eyes, you'll find the view is ever wider, till the vanities fade and your love burns brighter and brighter.
Yes, thank you. I can never recount my lyrics unless I'm singing them.
I know, right? Totally.
Yeah, but I feel like the gospel gives us such an expansive, we talked about this over lunch, an expansive view of humanity, such a gorgeous view of this planet and this universe, and there's so much fodder to write from, and paint from, and we can miss that if we're just trying to make a buck, for one thing. And that can be done in the Christian context or outside of the Christian context. I think either way, we just want to be holding everything as precious and sacred and seeing what did God intend for this, whether it's the forest, or our next door neighbor, or the laptop, or just all the things in our lives.
Yeah. Well, I love the chorus, Christa. Holy, holy, all that is within us, all that is without, all of life is holy ground.
Yeah.
And, it's so difficult for us to accept the parts within us that we don't like, that are sinful, that we reject.
Mm-hmm.
And we wind up being cruel and unloving to ourselves because we're rejecting parts of ourselves. And God loves all of us,
the whole thing.
Good, the bad, everything in between. And Jesus gave himself for all of us.
Right.
And so I know that I've been totally into segmenting, hiding from God the parts that that I think are unlovely and right. I mean,
so it's interesting because we look outside of ourselves and say that's secular, that's sacred, and that's bad music, that's good music, and we do it with ourselves. That's the bad part of me. That's the flesh. This is the spirit.
Right, yeah.
And I understand the confusion over that because the language in our scripture, there is that connotation of flesh, but at the same time, God created the body and said it was good, too. So I think we throw the baby out with the bathwater a lot of the time.
Well, and flesh also having the connotation of anything that is not dependent on God, our own way of being, rather than being in Him. So, but it's so confusing.
It is a confusing thing.
Those darn
But
preachers.
I feel like it's funny because my kids will make fun of me because any movie we watch, I can say, "Oh, do you see the metaphor in that? Do you see how that's actually like pointing to a true thing about how humans operate, or our true longing for God? Or do you see how he's kind of taking a pilgrimage?" And it can be the most, quote, secular movie or song, and that's just the way I either was taught by along the way to. I think it's much more helpful to us in our Christian walk to go through life with eyes that are looking for the redemption story everywhere, instead of trying to amputate all the things that are not readily and obviously Christian, right?
That's so good.
I think he's hidden his truth in so many surprising places, in works created by people who maybe overtly want nothing to do with God. Sometimes you can just find the truth hidden everywhere, and that's beautiful. It's like, I have this song called Panning for Gold, an older song, and it kind of deals with that, just being surprised and delighted to find God everywhere, to find truth hidden. Not in its full and true context, not in the full gospel story, but I think people reflect the image of God without meaning to all the time.
You think singers and dreamers invent escape from the real. Oh, but they have eyes to see what must be revealed. There's a kingdom before us whose gate is always open. Looks like earth and sounds like human voices, and it feels like heaven. All that is within us
Well, let's talk a little bit about Down, Down, Low. I know we mentioned it earlier, but let's talk about it just as a composition and where that's coming from.
That song felt so quirky to me that I was embarrassed to play it for anybody at first.
It's so fun. I love it.
It is fun. And I think that taught me something about songwriting process too. I wrote it in the car, or wrote part of it, the first part of it, in the car while I was driving from a gig in Atlanta back home to Nashville, and it was during the election season 2016, and I was completely stressed out because I'm a conflict avoidance person, and I just wanted everybody to be quiet. Like, it just felt everything felt so angry and loud, and
it was
yes,
totally.
And it was hard for anybody. But so I think I just started, thumping on the steering wheel, and I don't know. I think it was. The first line, the first part I wrote was the first line. Sometimes you gotta go dark. Sometimes you gotta be quiet. Just wanting to say, well, maybe I can't really speak into anything right now because it's too much. Like, I just need to be quiet and be a listener right now. And I think I was angry because I felt like nobody was listening. Nobody was interested in actually having a productive conversation. And we seldom are. We come to things with our opinions, and we don't want to change our minds. We don't. We just look for things that already confirm what we already believe. And so, and all of us do that. I mean, unless you're super aware, I think we all do. So I wrote that song not out of, that was one of the few songs that wasn't dealing with my marriage or my personal life at the time, but it was really me wanting to speak to the idea of humility and listening. So I wrote it in this kind of quirky way without the piano, and I always write at the piano. And then I came home and I was like, I kind of like this. And the bridge it diverges from it's very melodic and kind of gentle. It's different than the dancey nature of the rest of the song. Mm-hmm. But I didn't stop myself. I didn't censor. I thought, it's quirky, and I'm just going to leave it like that for a minute. And I sent it to my friend Jess Ray out in North Carolina and said, what do you think about this? This is totally weird. And she's like, it's weird and I love it. Let's do it. So, because she was doing some demos for me at the time. So that was enough to encourage me to leave it. And I want to do that more. I think we smooth out the edges of our songwriting a lot, especially if you have any commercial aims. I think that's a blessing of being in the indie world. And if you find your little niche that appreciates that, then just go with it, because you have a freedom that you don't have if a ton of big business is investing in you, right?
Exactly.
So you can get quirky, and a lot of times I am finding more and more that's what my people end up loving the most, because it's fresh and it stands out,
Sometimes you gotta go dark. Sometimes you gotta be quiet. Sometimes you gotta get far from the voices that stir up violence. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. You gotta get down, down low. You gotta turn it. Down, down low. You gotta take it. Down, down low. You gotta get down low. Sometimes you gotta go first. Sometimes you gotta be sorry. Sometimes you're gonna get hurt and go back to where you started. Everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to listen. You gotta get down, down low. You gotta turn it. Down, down low. You gotta take it. Down, down low. Down low. Find the voice that speaks in every tongue. Hear the song that rises. Sometimes you gotta go dark. Sometimes you gotta be quiet. Sometimes you gotta get far from the voices that stir up violence. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. Everybody wants to talk. Nobody wants to listen. You gotta get down, down low. You gotta turn it down, down low. You gotta get down, down low. You gotta turn it down, down low. You gotta get down, down low. You gotta turn it down, down low. You gotta take it down, down low. You gotta get down low.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the songs, just briefly. I mean, you have had songs, of course, recorded by Plumb, Natalie Grant, Ellie Holcomb, Jenny Owens, of course. And I'm kind of looking through here, of course, your own work, Selah, Sarah Groves. Just, schlocky little list here of
it's a short list, but they're good ones.
Yeah.
Admire those artists.
Well, if you had to pick one that you could say, I'm going to put you totally on the spot.
Man.
You should have seen the look on her face, guys. But if you had to pick one that you could say you were the proudest of, or maybe got the deepest satisfaction from writing, or felt like revealed most of who you are, how would that...
Definitely Held, that Natalie Grant recorded, was the most, stands out the most for me because it was written not for anybody in the industry. I wrote that before I had any publishing contacts or anything. I was living in North Carolina, and within the span of a year, I had come into relationship with, or gotten to know on a deeper level, 3 women. One, my friend Vanitha Reisner, who had lost her baby at 8 weeks after the baby was born, 8 weeks old. And my friend Patty Bryce, whose husband had passed away very quickly of cancer, and they were in their 30s, and she had 3 young children. And then my mother-in-law had shared the story of delivering a stillborn baby. And what was remarkable to me about these 3 stories is that these women had suffered such extraordinary loss, and yet they were not, I used to say it this way, that they were not living devastated lives. They were praising God, and they were alive and awake and active and vibrant, strong women that I was learning so much from. And they just had a profoundness about them that was so beautiful. So I wrote this song, and I had a little 8-track recorder at the time at home, and just put a little recording of it together for each of those women. And that was, 5 years before we got it to Natalie. So, and there's so many beautiful things that happened with that song, and so many stories that came to me and to Natalie. And one really cool thing is my friend Vanitha, one of those 3 women, she went into a sandwich shop one time, and she's an author herself, so she's written about this in her book. But she went into a sandwich shop, and she was waiting to have a sandwich made, a sub sandwich, and she's feeling a little impatient, I think, because it's taking a long time. And all of a sudden, Held starts playing over the radio in there. And the young man at the counter said to her, would you mind if I just take a minute before I make your sandwich? He's like, I can't remember the tragedy in his life. It may have been his mother had passed away. He had experienced some great loss. And he said, this song has just been everything to me the last few months. And he's talking to Vanitha, who inspired the song,
wow.
but he
That's
had
amazing.
no idea. He had no idea. And she didn't tell him, that this was written about her baby boy. And so she just had this encounter where she personally got to witness how her son's death was being redeemed in a way, and being used to bring life and hope and comfort to strangers. And I mean, just what an incredible thing for her to get to see firsthand. it doesn't mean anybody wants to go back and have to relive any of that or would wish that on themselves or anyone else. But that was a remarkable experience to just, and once that song was out there, and Natalie was so brave to do that song because it's format wise, the way I wrote it, it did not fit a radio. 2 long verses before the chorus. It had been passed around and pitched to many artists. Publishers had tried to rewrite it to make it more palatable for the Christian market. And Natalie just said, nope, I want to record it just like it is. So kudos to her.
Kudos. And I think that's a great testimony, like we were talking about, of a redeeming pain and making it something that communicates rather than just splashes people with green hurt and slime. So,
and it was interesting too, because it was more honest about the heartache than what we in the Christian market had been doing much of prior to that. And, or not because of that song, but it just was a time shift around that time. And so I would get letters from people saying, you obviously went through this personally, or you couldn't have written about this. I said, I have not been through this personally. I've been a good listener, and I've been blessed to be in the room with people who are willing to be honest about both the reality and presence of God and about how much it hurts while you're waiting, So it's really important. That sharing of story is very important.
Wow, that's awesome, Christa. Well, I know that you have a heart for mentoring and helping other artists. Maybe they don't even know totally what they are as far as, am I a songwriter? Am I a singer-songwriter? Am I a singer? Am I a barista? What am I? So tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
I love encouraging other people to do whatever it is that God has planted in their hearts to do. I'm not the person that's going to be able to coach somebody how to, make it in the big business, because my vocation has not been that way. But I love helping people develop their songwriting. I love speaking into our humanity and to a person's uniqueness and encouraging people to not be, to not shrink, but to value themselves, value the unique voice that they've been given. I'm a huge champion of the underdog, huge fan of people taking the lesser traveled path. And I just really want people, most of all, to understand that, like for me, singing, if I ever am asked to perform Held, I can do that without shrinking. Now, maybe at one point I couldn't, because I understand that Natalie Grant is magnificent, and she has this huge sphere of influence that I do not have, and a huge platform that I do not have. That does not matter one whit. In the end, at the end of the day, there are people in this tiny circle that I intersect with that are not in that big sphere, that big circle of hers, and they need a person too. They need a songwriter for them. And so I'm happy to be the person who plays songs for that small circle, because those, and my friend Emily Freeman is an author who writes about these things too. And we were saying once that it's very easy to undervalue the small crowd and say, oh, I'm playing house shows for, 30 people. I want to be in arenas playing for 30,000 people. But those 30 people are not insignificant. If 10 people got hit by a bus in front of your house, those 10 lives would matter so much to you. You'd want to know every name. Their significance would carry great weight. And so we need to value those lives that God puts in our paths.
Good. That is a good way to put it. And so what would you say to our listeners who are primarily aspiring songwriters, kind of outside the Nashville bubble, but maybe they wish they could do what you do? What would you, and it doesn't even have to be about songwriting. I mean, maybe a piece of business advice, or what would you say to someone?
The thing that's on my mind today concerning this, so I'll pick it as the one thing, is just to write about everything. write and write and write as much as you can, as often as you can, and write about everything. Nothing is off limits. So if you don't have a big theological inspiration today, write about how you spent your morning. Just practice valuing all the different micro stories in your life and telling those stories. Sometimes you start out writing about some concrete little image in front of you, and you start to see the metaphor in it as you go. As you write, you see the deeper truth that God's pointing you to through the small things. So I would just mainly say don't consider anything off limits to start with.
Wow, that is rich. That's been how true, how helpful that is. So what's your favorite way to interact with your listeners and people that could be potential fans?
My favorite place is Patreon right now. It's a smaller group, but some of the stuff I share on there is free, and some of it's just $1, a month. But there are different levels that people get in on. But obviously, my favorite way to interact with anybody is in person. So that's the best. But I don't go out on the road very often doing my own shows. So probably social media-wise, I spend more time on Instagram than the other socials.
Is it just at Christa Wells on Instagram?
It is Christa Wells Music. I
Oh,
believe.
okay.
There
Great.
is another Christa Wells out there, so we swap on different platforms.
I got you, right.
Sometimes I'm Christa Wells Music, sometimes she is.
Okay. And then ChristaWellsMusic.com is your website where our listeners can tap into your music and your coaching and read all about you. And thank you so much. This has been so delightful.
I enjoyed every minute. Lunch and interview.
Fun. Little P.F. Changs and some get to know you and a great podcast. Well, Christa Wells, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
We wish you the best. Happy 2019.
Thank you. You too.
I know you know it now. You've got it figured out. I'm only human. I'm only human after all. Answers were easier then. I'd little chance of being wrong. These days are different, and I'm only human after all. We don't have to see eye to eye. You will always be a friend of mine. So go where you must go. Be who you need to be. I'll meet you on the road. Tell me what you see. Butterfly. My butterfly. I would be lying to pretend I wanna lose. Having you with me, I want you with me, yes I do.
Hey, what a fantastic show today. I hope you caught all the value bombs that were dropped on this one and that you'll begin to immediately incorporate them into your songwriting. You can get even more valuable songwriting tools and inspiration when you join NCS membership. You can become a part of a growing community of songwriters from around the world and tap into some of the most powerful resources available to step you up in your songwriting destiny. Check out NCS membership now at NashvilleChristianSongwriters.com and get ready for some exponential power to help you fulfill your call to write. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.